We left off in Summer of the Monkeys where Jay Berry was headed back to the store to talk to Grandpa because he doesn't know how to catch those monkeys. After they stole his traps, his gunny sack, his apples, he's headed back to talk to Grandpa for some more advice. Grandpa was sitting on the porch of the store when Rowdy and I came walking up the road. He was just sitting there in his old rocking chair with the fly swatter in his hand, looking off across the country. As I walked up, Grandpa peered at me over the tops of his glasses and smiled. "You can take those monkeys out to the barn and put them in the corn crib," he said. "They'll be safe there." I grinned a little, but I didn't want to. "Oh, Grandpa," I said as I sat down beside him, "you know I don't have any monkeys. I didn't catch a one." "Didn't catch any?" Grandpa said, trying to look surprised. "Why, I figured you'd have a sack full of monkeys by now. What happened? Couldn't you find them?" "Oh, I found them all right," I said. "It's just like you figured it was. The bottoms are full of monkeys, all kinds of monkeys." "That's fine," Grandpa said. "That's what I wanted to hear. Did you see that $100 monkey?" "See him?" I said. "I'll say I saw him. I saw so much of that monkey I don't care if I never lay eyes on him again. He's the smartest thing that ever climbed a tree. I believe he's smarter than the president." Grandpa laughed and said, "Oh, I don't think he's that smart, is he? For the good of the country, I hope he isn't. What happened anyway?" Taking a deep breath, I told Grandpa everything that had happened down in the bottoms. I didn't leave a thing out. Grandpa started fidgeting in his chair like something was biting him. He jerked out his old red handkerchief and made a big to-do about blowing his nose. I couldn't see very much of his face for the handkerchief, but what I could see was as red as a busted watermelon. Grandpa was having a hard time holding back a good laugh. It always made me feel good to see my grandpa laugh because he laughed all over. But right then, I wouldn't have enjoyed hearing Santa Claus laugh. I was miserable. Grandpa finally got a hold of himself and said, "I figured that monkey was smart, but I didn't think he was that smart." "I didn't either, Grandpa," I said. "It's a cinch that I'll never catch him in a trap. As long as he's around, it doesn't look like I'll be able to catch any of the little monkeys either. I don't know what to do now." Grandpa got that serious look in his eyes. "You know, it's always a good idea to have more than one iron in the fire," he said. "You watch the store for a few minutes. I'll be right back." "Do you have another plan, Grandpa?" I asked. "Sure, I have another plan," Grandpa said. "That's what grandpas are for, isn't it? Don't worry about catching those monkeys. Before you know it, we'll have every one of them in the sack." Grandpa was the best boy perker-upper in the world. The way he was talking had me feeling like I was already sitting in the saddle and shooting at everything that moved. I watched Grandpa shuffle off toward the barn and disappear inside. He wasn't gone long before I saw him coming back, carrying the oddest-looking outfit I'd ever laid eyes on. It was a long pole with a net on one end. As Grandpa walked up, I said, "Grandpa, what in the world is that thing?" Hefting the long pole in his hand, Grandpa chuckled and said, "To be truthful, I don't know what it is. I don't think it has a name. I guess right now it is as good as the time as any to give it a name. Let's just call it a monkey-catching net." "A monkey-catching net?" I said, big-eyed. "Oh, Grandpa, you can't catch a monkey with that thing, can you?" "Well," Grandpa said, still chuckling, "you'll have to admit one thing. If you ever got a monkey in this outfit, he would sure be a caught monkey." On taking a closer look at the odd contraption, I could see that the pole part had eyes on it like the guides on a fishing rod, and two strings ran down from the loop of the net through the eyelets almost to the end of the pole. On the end of each string was a good-sized celluloid ring. One was blue, the other was yellow. "Grandpa," I said, "what are all those strings and rings for?" "That's what works the outfit," Grandpa said. "Watch now." Poking the pole out in front of him, Grandpa pulled the yellow ring and the net opened. "Now let's say there's a monkey out there and you want to catch him," he said, making a long swipe at an imaginary monkey. "Now he's in the net. Watch closely. Here comes the good part." He pulled the blue ring and the net closed. "See how it works?" he said. "What do you think of it?" Once I had seen how the net worked, I was so pleased I couldn't say a word. I just stood there staring at that wonderful monkey-catching net. "Well," Grandpa said rather impatiently, "what do you think of it?" I think it's a dandy, Grandpa, I said. That's the slickest working thing I've ever seen. You're right. If I ever got a monkey in it, he would sure be a cop monkey, wouldn't he? Do you think you could ever get close enough to a monkey to slap the net on him? Grandpa asked. I thought a minute and said, I don't think I could ever catch that $100 monkey in it, Grandpa. He's too smart to be caught that easy. But I might be able to catch the little ones. They're not half as smart as that big monkey, and they don't seem to be scared at all. That's all right, Grandpa said. You catch the little ones first, and then we'll figure out something for that $100 monkey. We're going to catch him too, you know. Grandpa handed me the net, and just to get used to it, I made a few swipes with it. At first, I had a little trouble with the ring pulling part. I was closing when I should have been opening, but I finally got it, and everything looked fine to me. Grandpa, I believe this is a better idea than those traps were, I said. All I have to do now is figure out how I'm going to get a monkey in this thing. Grandpa grunted, and taking the net from me, he laid it down on the ground. Motioning as he talked, he said, I believe if I were you, I'd work it this way. Right about where the end of the handle is, I'd dig a hole big enough for you and Rowdy to hide in. It might be a good idea to put some brush over the top of the hole so those monkeys can't see you from the treetops. Then, I'd take leaves and cover the handle and net until a monkey can't see a thing. Be sure the net is open. Lay your apples in the center of the loop, then crawl down in the hole and wait. When a monkey steps in to get an apple, just lift up on the handle, jerk the blue ring, and you'll have one for sure. I saw right away that Grandpa's idea was a Jim dandy, but there was one thing that was bothering me. Grandpa, I said, that's a good idea, all right, but I think we're overlooking something. That $100 monkey. He sits up in those sycamore trees and watches everything I do. If he sees me digging that hole and hiding that net, he won't get in a mile of it. He won't let any of those little monkeys get close to it either. How am I going to go around that? Grandpa frowned and started scratching his head. Well, you could go down there tonight and dig a hole, he said. Monkeys don't stir around at night. They go to sleep. Then in the morning you'd have to be there before they wake up. That way they wouldn't know what was going on. By golly, Grandpa, I said. You sure think of everything, don't you? That's just what I'll do. I'll go down there tonight and dig the hole. Then in the morning all I'll have to do is hide the net, put out my apples, and wait for those monkeys. I really believe we'll outfox them this time. I sure do, don't you? Grandpa laughed and said, I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Now that we've got everything figured out, maybe you'd better be hightailing it for home. And if this doesn't work out, I wouldn't let it bother me. Just remember, there never was an animal that couldn't be caught. I was feeling so good I could have hugged my grandpa's neck, but ever since I had grown up to be a man, I had quit doing things like that. Just as I picked up the net, I thought of something. Grandpa, I asked, where in the world did you ever get a thing like this anyway? Grandpa laughed. Then he walked over and sat down in his old rocker. He picked up his fly swatter, reared back, and said, That's a long story. It happened way back when you were just a little bitty thing. One year, a fella from the college in Tahlequah came up here and stayed all summer with your grandma and me. He was one of those butterfly professors. Grandpa, I interrupted, did you say this fellow was a butterfly professor? I think there's another name for them, Grandpa said, but I don't know what it is. It's a big word and would break your tongue to say it. Anyhow, when this fella came up here, he brought that net with him. All he did that summer was lope around through the country catching butterflies in that net. He must have caught 1,000,000. I laughed out loud. Grandpa, I said, what in the world did that fellow want with all those butterflies? He studied them, Grandpa said, just like you would study a book. I never saw anything like it. He would spend hours looking through a big magnifying glass at the butterflies, and then he'd write things down on paper. After he had given them a good looking over, he would pin them to a small white card. He put those cards in small glass-topped boxes. Grandpa, I said, I've caught a lot of butterflies, but they're such pretty little things I never did stick pins in them. I always turned them loose. Why, that professor must have been crazy, or just plain mean. Oh, I don't think he was a mean fella, Grandpa said, but there could have been something wrong with him. I know one thing. If it hadn't been for your grandma, I would have run that professor clean out of the country. Run him out of the country? I said, very surprised. Why'd you want to do that? Because I was going broke, Grandpa snapped. That's why. I came close to losing everything I had that summer. From the day that professor got here until the day he left, I never sold as much as a can of snuff. Never sold anything? I said, more surprised than ever. How come you didn't sell anything? Did this professor have something to do with it? He sure did, Grandpa growled. He had everything to do with it. You know, most of my trade is with those Cherokee Indians, and you know how superstitious they are about crazy people. They think if a person has lost his mind, he's dead already, and his soul has gone to a happy hunting grounds. They won't get close to a crazy man, and won't come around where one is. The way the professor was carrying on, every Indian in these hills thought he was crazy. And they wouldn't come within a mile of my store, so I didn't sell anything. I know how those Indians feel about crazy people, Grandpa, I said, but how come they thought the professor was crazy? Oh, there were lots of reasons, Grandpa said. In a way, you couldn't blame them. This professor was an odd-looking duck. He was all as long as a rail fence and as bony as a whalebone corset. He had a little beard that stuck straight out from his chin about 5 inches. It was so sharp on the end you could have split a stump with it. I never saw a man with so much hair on his head, and I don't think he ever combed it, as it was always bushed out like the tail of a scared tomcat. I laughed and said, "Why, Grandpa, no wonder the Indians thought that professor was crazy. What if I saw a man who looked like that? I'd think he was crazy, too." Grandpa nodded his head and said, "It wasn't only the way the professor looked. I think the way he acted and his clothes had a lot to do with it. He wore shirts that didn't have any sleeves at all, and his pants were cut off about to here." With his finger, Grandpa made a slash across his leg above his knees. Every time the professor got after a butterfly, he would start running and waving that net and yelling and making all kinds of racket. The Indians saw him loping around through the country and figured that he had lost his mind. If it hadn't been for your grandma, I would have taken a club to that professor. "What did Grandma have to do with it, Grandpa?" I asked. Grandpa frowned and started digging at the whiskers on his chin. "This professor was a talker," he said. "He could talk a fish right out of the river. Your grandma thought he was the smartest man in the world. He got her all interested in those butterflies, and she wouldn't listen to me running him off." I laughed and laughed and laughed. Great big tears boiled out of my eyes and ran all over my face. Still laughing and wiping tears, I said, "Grandpa, I sure would like to see one of those butterfly professors. That would be better than going to the circus." Grandpa grunted and said, "If I have anything to do with it, you'll never see one around here. There's not enough room in the country for me and another one of those butterfly professors. One of us will have to leave." I was still laughing when Grandma hollered from the house, "Jay Barry, is that you?" "Yes, Grandma," I hollered back. "It's me. Before you go home," Grandma said, "you come by the house. I have some things I want to send to your mother." "All right, Grandma," I said. On hearing Grandpa got all nervous. He got up from his chair and started fidgeting around. Looking at me, he said, "I don't believe it would be a good idea to let your grandma know too much about this monkey catching business of ours. When it comes to hunting and fishing and things like that, women can't see things like men do." "I know just what you mean, Grandpa," I said. "I have enough trouble with Mama and Daisy. Every time I leave the house, Mama thinks I'm going to get eaten up by something. And if I ever catch a little old lizard, Daisy thinks I'm the meanest boy in the world. The other day she told me that if I didn't quit catching things, God was going to send a bolt of lightning down out of the sky and split me wide open." Grandpa laughed and said, "Oh, I don't think the good Lord would do anything like that. Not to a boy, anyway. He can understand lots of things better than women folk can. I found out a long time ago not to pay too much attention to the women. They don't mean half of what they say anyhow." "I try not to pay attention to any of them, Grandpa," I said, "but it doesn't seem to do any good. Why, Mama has broken so many switches off our peach trees, I don't think they will ever have any more peaches on them." Grandpa laughed and said, "Peaches are pretty good things to have around, all right, but they're not the most important things in the world." "They're not half as important as hunting and fishing," I said. Looking at his watch, Grandpa said, "Well, it's getting late, and you'd better be getting for home. I don't want you to be out on the road after dark." "Oh, I'm not scared of the dark, Grandpa," I said. "I used to be, but not as long as Rowdy's with me. He can take care of anything that wants to jump on us." Looking at Rowdy, Grandpa smiled and said, "Yes, I guess he could. You know, when I was a boy about your age, I had a dog too. He was a hound just like Rowdy, and I felt about like you do. As long as he was with me, I wasn't scared of anything." "Why, Grandpa," I said, "I didn't know you had a dog when you were a boy. You never said anything to me about it before. I bet you could tell me a lot of good stories about some of the things you and your dog did." With a faraway look in his eyes, Grandpa said, "Yes, I expect I could. But right now, with it getting late and your grandma wanting to see you, I don't think we have the time. Someday, after we've caught all of the monkeys, I'll tell you about some of the things my old dog and I got into." "Is that a promise, Grandpa?" I asked. "Yes," Grandpa said, nodding his head, "that's a promise. Now you'd better be on your way. I have to lock up the store and get my chores done." I thanked Grandpa again for all the help he had given me and started for the house to see what Grandma wanted. Chapter 6. I hid my net behind a lilac bush in Grandma's front yard, walked around the house, and came in through the back door. That was the quickest way to the kitchen, and I dearly loved that part of the house. I could never remember a time when I walked into Grandma's kitchen that I didn't get something yummy to eat. I had one of the best little old grandmas a boy ever had, but she worried about me too much. She was always worrying about my health and my schooling and everything else you could think of. Grandma was a pretty good doctor, too. No germ could escape her eagle eye. About 3 times a year, she would take time off from her work and give me a complete examination. While these examinations were taking place, I'd have to stand perfectly still with my head thrown back and with my mouth open like an angry turtle. Grandma would look at my teeth, my tongue, and my tonsils, and way down into my throat. After she had given my insides a good looking over, then she'd look me over on the outside. She would peel back my eyelids and look at my eyeballs, peer down in my ears, and punch around on me with her fingers. About the only thing Grandma could ever find wrong with me would be a few dirty spots. It made no difference if Rowdy and I had been swimming in the river all day long. Grandma usually found a little bit of dirt on me somewhere. I never could understand how it got there. I didn't mind these examinations so much. It was the standing still part that always got the best of me. I just never could stand still very long. Grandma was over at her cupboard putting something in a basket when I walked into the kitchen. She turned, looked at me, frowned, and said, "I declare, Jayberry, I believe you're getting skinnier and skinnier. Don't you ever eat nothing?" "Eat anything?" I said. "Why, Grandma, I eat everything I can get my hands on. You know that." "I know," Grandma said, "but it doesn't seem to be putting any meat on your bones. Why, you look like a fishing pole." I laughed and said, "Oh, Grandma, I know I'm a little skinny, but I don't look like a fishing pole." "Do I?" Grandma smiled and said, "Well, maybe not exactly like a fishing pole, but almost." "Being skinny doesn't count, Grandma," I said. "It's being hard that counts, and I'm hard as a flint rock." I pumped up one of my arms and said, if you don't believe I'm hard, just feel my muscles." Grandma came over and very tenderly pinched my muscle between 2 fingers. "Well," she said, "it's hard all right, but there's not much of it there. It's not much bigger than a quail's egg." This hurt my feelings a little bit. Looking down at my arm, I said, "Oh, Grandma, my muscle is bigger than a quail's egg. If it got any bigger, I couldn't even carry it around." Grandma smiled and said, "I'll bet a piece of huckleberry pie and a glass of milk would help build those muscles a little, don't you?" "It sure would, Grandma," I said. "The huckleberry pie that you bake must put muscles on a grapevine." Grandma chuckled and said, "I'm not interested in putting muscles on any grapevines, but I would like to see yours puff up a little more." While I was eating, Grandma said, "How's your little sister getting along?" My mouth was so full of huckleberry pie I had to swallow 4 or 5 times before I had room enough to say anything. "Oh, I guess she's all right, Grandma. You know how Daisy is. She's always laughing and singing and hopping around on that old crutch. You couldn't tell if anything was wrong with her or not." Looking concerned, Grandma said, "Jayberry, I don't think your little sister is as happy as she lets on. She just doesn't want to worry anyone. I'll bet if the truth were known, she's probably in pain all the time." I didn't like to talk about Daisy's crippled leg. It always made me feel bad, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. Besides, right then I had too many worries of my own to wrestle with. There were those monkeys to be caught, and a chance to get the pony and 22. I figured that was about all the worries I could take care of at one time. Grandma said, I know that your mother and father have been saving their money hoping to send Daisy to the hospital. Do you know if they've saved any? I guess they've saved a little, Grandma, I said, but I don't think it's very much. Papa can't seem to get a hold of much money. He gave up his smoking tobacco, and Mama has been saving her egg money. She doesn't order anything out of the catalog anymore. They're saving every dime they can, but I don't think they save very much. Grandma frowned and said, Times are bad. It's a problem for anyone to save money. Your grandpa and I have been putting a few dollars away to help out, but you know how your grandpa is. He does more credit business than he does cash business, and people can't pay their bills. I felt pretty good when Grandma told me that she and Grandpa were trying to save some money too. If they were all saving their money, then sooner or later Daisy's leg would be fixed up. In fact, I couldn't see where anyone had anything to worry about but me. Getting up from the table, I said, Grandma, I have so many things to do, I'd better be getting home. What did you want me to take to Mama? Picking up the basket, Grandma handed it to me and said, I baked some fresh bread today and I want to send a few loaves to her. Be careful now and don't mash them. I won't, Grandma, I said, and thanks for the pie and milk. Are you sure you wouldn't care for another piece of pie? Grandma asked. I patted my tummy and said, No thanks, Grandma. I think that'll hold me until I get home. I had more than enough room for another piece of Grandma's pie, but with all those monkeys hopping around in my head, I couldn't think too much about eating. On my way home, I decided that I'd try out my net on something that was alive. There were plenty of rabbits, chipmunks, and birds to try it out on, but every time I poked the net out toward one of them, it would scare them half to death. They took off like they were leaving the country for good. I finally gave up and decided that I'd wait until I got home to catch something. We had all kinds of things around our farm that weren't scared of anything like a little old net. Not wanting to answer a lot of questions from Mama and Daisy about my monkey catching net, I hid it under the front porch before going in the house. Mama and Daisy were in the kitchen fixing supper. Setting the basket on the table, I said, Mama, Grandma baked some bread today and she sent you some. Well, that was nice of your Grandma, Mama said. Did you thank her for the bread? We're going to stop right there for today.